Hey there everybody, I'm Peter Scove, this is Music as a Journey, and we are doing episode 5 in our series of the first 10 albums of a particular band. If this is your first viewing of this series here, back in January I did Aerosmith and Blue Oyster Cult. In February took a look at Scorpions and Black Sabbath, and now it's March and we're going to be taking a look at Rush. I've got a few things to say here before we get started on it. First of all, I've been a little hesitant to do any videos focusing on Rush, mainly because I think of all the classic and legendary bands out there, Rush in a way are a band that remains almost untainted. They've never had a history of serious substance abuse. They don't have a history of trashing hotel rooms or trouble with the law. They don't have a history of dramatic interband clashes, intermember clashes, or anything like that. It's just been almost from the beginning, from the recording beginning, it's basically been the three guys. Yeah, we'll get into the history before that, but it's basically been the three guys always working hard, doing their best, and creating albums that whether they're your favorites or not doesn't matter. They are just phenomenal works, and there's such a reputation behind not only the band and the music and the albums, but each of the individual members. So I've been a little hesitant to crack this one because I just feel like I'm walking on sacred ground. And I want to be a little bit careful out there. Plus, basically, people who are fans, who have been fans of the band since the 1970s even, they probably just know so much more about the band than I do. So I feel a little bit like a student trying to educate the teacher on the subject. Anyway, I want to give you a little bit of background history of my own experience with Rush. Actually, I have known about Rush since the very beginning of my exploration into rock music in general. The very first rock music cassette I ever owned was a compilation album called Rock 82, which I believe was released somewhere around the end of 81 because I got it as a Christmas present, and yet all the songs on the album are actually 1981 releases. So I think it was an album for 1982 with songs that were popular in 81. And among the many great songs that were actually on that album, one of them was Tom Sawyer by Rush. And another song that I think is kind of noteworthy to mention is Lunatic Fringe by Red Rider. And it's kind of going to be a reason why I mention that. It's coming up in a couple of minutes here. The very next cassette that I ever got after that one was Bob and Doug McKenzie's Great White North album, which was a comedy album but featured a guest appearance by Geddy Lee singing their song Take Off to the Great White North. So, by this point, I already knew about Rush, at least one of their songs, and I knew that Geddy Lee was the vocalist for Rush, at least. After that, my musical explorations went on through AC/DC and into heavy metal after that. But I always listened to the rock radio around Vancouver. There was the classic rock station as well as CFOX, which played newer stuff and older stuff. And I know I heard songs like In the Mood, Fly By Night, Closer to the Heart. I heard those songs on the radio because I recognized them later on when I actually got the albums. However, by the time I really started getting interested in music, which would have been around 83, 84, the Rush songs that I was hearing were songs from Grace Under Pressure, and that wasn't hard rock or heavy metal. And throughout the rest of the 80s, whenever I heard anything by Rush that was new, it just simply wasn't the music I was interested in. However, I knew Rush had a certain reputation about them. So whenever I heard something about Rush, I always gave it a little bit of an extra ear. And I remember when Roll the Bones came out and the video came on, and I thought, okay, let's see if there's anything here for me. And it wasn't a bad song, until that rap part came in. I thought, nah, Rush is not for me. Then finally I heard Half the World from Test for Echo. So 15 years of knowing about Rush. The first album I finally bought was after 15 years. From then on, I got Moving Pictures. Later on, I heard Subdivisions on Much Music, and I thought that's actually a pretty cool song, even though it's got lots of synthesizer. And I got the album. I eventually got Permanent Waves, and I think the last purchase out of that original set would have been the Feedback EP, the album of cover songs they did. After that, there was a bit of a gap until 2010. I was actually thinking about, I couldn't find any new exciting music. Of course, there was a whole world of it out there I just didn't know about at the time because I was still going to CD stores to see what was available. And so I thought, well, maybe what I should do is just pick out 25 of my favorite classic albums and get them remastered. Enjoy them with improved sound. And one of them was Rush Moving Pictures. I thought I should get that. And by this time I had an iPhone and I was checking Wikipedia, the article about Rush, and I had no idea that a Canadian band was held in such high esteem and had achieved so much. At that time, Rush was third place behind the Beatles and the Rolling Stones for having the most platinum albums. Now, fourth place behind Aerosmith as well. But I thought, okay, I really, really need to check out this band. And I got 2112 and Farewell to Kings, and that was it. I was off. Within 3 months, I had the entire studio catalog, and I listened to almost nothing but Rush for 6 months. I think I purposely listened to something else at one point just to make sure that I wasn't like totally hooked on Rush and only Rush for the rest of my life. So, here we go now. Let's get started on the first 10 albums. I have a suspicion this is going to be another long video. I've already talked a lot. So the band actually comes together in 1968 with the founding members of Alex Lifeson on guitar, John Rutsey on drums, and Jeff Jones on bass and vocals. Now, they rehearsed together, they started doing covers of Hendrix, Cream, John Mayall, and so on, and then by the time they were going to do their second gig, Jeff Jones decided that he didn't want, well, one article said he didn't want to go to the gig, he preferred to go to a party. Another thing that I read about just simply said that he felt he wanted to go on and do something else, but he recommended his schoolmate, Gary Lee Weinrib, or Geddy as he was known. Now, in the movie, we know that Alex and Geddy knew each other from school as well, and they talked about some memories together. So I guess they're all from like the same neighborhood, basically, Willowdale, in Toronto, Ontario. So anyway, at that point then, Geddy joins the band, and now we have the 3 members. The interesting thing about Jeff Jones is that he went on later on to play in a band, I think it was called Ocean or Oceans, but later on after that, he went to play in Red Rider. So the interesting thing, I said that Rush had Tom Sawyer on that Rock 82 compilation, and Red Rider also had a song on that compilation. The bass player on that song, Jeff Jones, is the original bass player and vocalist for Rush way back when in 1968. But anyway, like I said, he didn't last very long. He recommended Geddy. Geddy came in, and then we got the lineup of Alex, Geddy, and John. However, even though this is the lineup that would record the album, the debut album in 1974, there were some lineup changes that occurred in between. Now, the Wikipedia article is a little more detailed about who came in and when. The book kind of glosses over it a bit. A fellow named Lindy Young was in the band playing keyboards for a while, and the band was a 4-piece. Now, apparently around this time, putting 2 different stories or 2 different sources together, the band members were 15 years old at this time when they were a 4-piece band, and they were approached by a 16-year-old named Ray Daniels, who said that he was interested in managing the band, even though he had no managerial experience. But he was a kind of a hustler and promoter. He was busy. He went out putting up posters on street posts, whatever, everywhere, utility poles, plastered them around town to promote the band. So he really worked hard to get the band out there and noticed. Now, an interesting thing about Ray Daniels is that during this time, he was actually crashing at a house that was occupied by a band called Sherman Peabody. And Sherman Peabody featured Buzz Sherman on vocals, who would later on be the vocalist for Moxie's first 3 albums, as well as Greg Godovitz, who would later on be in a band called Flood, and then finally form his own band, Goddo, in the late 70s. And I don't remember 100% correctly, but something tells me that Gil Moore of Triumph may have also been in the band at one point, but I should have checked that. Anyway, so we got the band, a 4-piece band, and then Ray Daniels decided that Geddy Lee was not really the best person to have as a frontman, and so he was asked to leave the band. And Geddy went off and started a blues band somewhere instead. I think may have been called Ogilvy or something like that. In the meantime, they got a guy in named Joe Perna to take over on bass and vocals. However, things didn't work out very well with him, and they had one particularly rough gig. And after that, Alex and John thought, no, we've got to get Geddy back in the band. So John had the duty of calling up Geddy and saying, look, we're very sorry. Would you please come back and join Rush? And Geddy said that the band that he was in at the time was actually doing a bit better, but he agreed to come back. And so by March 1972, the lineup had settled down once again to Alex Lifeson, Geddy Lee, and John Rutsey. 1973, the band recorded some demos and tried to promote them, sending them out to different record labels around Canada, but basically got rejected by everybody. However, they did go into the studio to record a single, Not Fade Away, a cover of a song by Buddy Holly originally, and a Rush original called You Can't Fight It on the B-side. This actually entered the charts in the Canadian charts. I think it was in the 80s somewhere, like around 86, 88 or something like that. And so the band decided to go in and record a full-length album. However, the person who was in charge of the mixing of the album didn't do a job that was satisfactory. The band were not happy with the results. The mix was not good. And so Ray Daniels managed to scrape together about $2,000 and get Terry Brown, an engineer named Terry Brown. And now Terry Brown had already put his name on several Canadian rock albums. I have a few of them on CD. It's kind of neat to look at them and think, oh, what's this band? Hey, Terry Brown produced. Wow. So anyway, they got Terry Brown in, and he really mixed it up nicely. In fact, they actually had to re-record some of the songs. Some of the songs originally that were going to be on the album were removed, and they recorded new songs. And finally, then, on their own label, because they'd been rejected by all the labels in Canada, they formed their own label, Moon Records. They released their single on Moon Records, and on March 1st, 1974, the debut album of Rush was also released on Moon Records originally. There's some dust on here. It's been sitting in a box for a while. This album, it is pretty interesting. Like this past week, I went back and listened to all the 10 albums I'm going to talk about, as well as some of the others. And it's kind of exciting to listen to this album now, knowing what the band achieved over the course of their long career. Going back and hearing that first song, Finding My Way, with its opening very Led Zeppelin-esque sound, and even Geddy Lee doing some ooh yeah, finding my way. It's really cool to think, wow, this is the beginning of the band. And in a way, I feel this is almost like the Rock-a-Rolla album by Judas Priest, which was also released in 1974, because both albums have the band's material that they had already been working with for the last 2 or 3 years, and didn't feature so much new material. So it's kind of interesting like that. And then both bands changed over to do something really different for their second album. So there's a kind of similarity there. Just looking at the songs on the back here. Here again, this is kind of, it sounds like one of those bluesy Led Zeppelin inspired pieces as well. What You're Doing is one of my favorites. I think it's my favorite track off here, a really kind of tough attitude, like heavy song. You've got In the Mood, of course, the song that was on the radio a lot, Before and After, with the kind of slow beginning and then more harder rocking rest of the song. And then, of course, Working Man at the back, which is clocking in here at 7 minutes and 10 seconds. The album was soon and very famously picked up by WMMS, was it? Out of Cleveland, and a certain Donna Helper chose that song for the rotation, and basically because of the length of the song, it was a good bathroom break song, and that really got the attention of the what they call the Rust Belt in the US, where it was just largely working class people who really understood working man, and also heavier music was actually popular in that area of the US anyway, so Rush really picked up. In fact, I watched a Rick Beato video just a couple of days ago where he was talking about Rush and saying that when this first album came out, he and his friends, they just thought, wow, Rush must be just a huge band like Led Zeppelin. They had no idea that they were just like some newcomers coming out of Canada. They thought, wow, what a monster band this must be. Anyway, there were some other difficulties not only with the mixing. When they went in to record the album, John Rutsey had said that he was going to rewrite some of the lyrics, freshen them up. And on the day of the recording, Geddy Lee asked him, okay, where are the lyrics? And he said, I tore them all up. So they were there to record. They had basically 2 nights that they recorded on an 8-track in the studio, and John Rutsey had scrapped all the lyrics. So Geddy quickly tried to scribble down some new ones, partly based on older versions that they had sung in the past. Now, this was actually kind of one of the beginning points of the problems with John. John Rutsey had was also suffering from juvenile diabetes. He had to take his insulin, his medication. There was even a time where he was out of the band temporarily before returning again. That and Geddy and Alex were thinking they wanted to explore more complex music. You know, they had been into all the kind of, blues and the kind of harder rocking bands of the 1960s, but now they were getting more interested in progressive music and they wanted to explore that. John, as been said in here and Wikipedia and in the movie, John was more of a straightforward rock drummer, more like into Bad Company. And if you listen to the drumming on here, it is some pretty solid rock drummer work. Great playing on here, excellent for what this album is, but yeah, it was not the direction the other 2 guys wanted to go in, and things led to things with the big tour now coming up. The band, by the way, got their album picked up by Mercury Records in the US. There was a tour scheduled that was going to take them in the US. John couldn't keep up with all that. It wasn't for his health, it wasn't for his interest, and the musical direction was not in his interest, and so basically it was decided John Rutsey was going to have to leave the band and they were going to have to get a replacement drummer. So just 2 weeks before they set off on their first tour into the US, opening for Uriah Heep and Manfred Mann, they auditioned 5 drummers, and one of them, Neil Peart, just turned out to be everything they could have hoped for. They apparently, even Neil was the 4th out of 5 drummers, and by the time they had auditioned him, they actually almost felt sorry for the 5th guy coming in. But anyway, Neil was the guy, and you can see this CD back here. This is Rush at the Agora Ballroom, Cleveland, Ohio, 26th of August, 1974. So by this point, Neil was not even a month with the band, but here they are. And so one of the interesting things is the track listing on the back here. It includes Garden Road, which was a song in their set list for a while, which never actually made it on any of the albums. As well, there is The Best I Can, which wouldn't make it onto a Rush album until the next one. Some critics will say this is actually, at the time, it was a pretty good album. Some people will say in retrospect, if you're starting out with Rush, this is not the place to start. It is just a straightforward hard rock, blues-based hard rock album of 1974. Other bands at the time, we had like Bachman Turner Overdrive, you had the Guess Who, you had Moxie, Thunder Mug, A Foot in Cold Water, Mahogany Rush, just lots of other hard rocking bands coming out of Canada at that time, and this just kind of fits snugly right in there. So Rush had secured a deal with Mercury Records. They were given a $75,000 advance on a $200,000 deal. I mean, that is pretty freaking amazing for 1974. And after fairly successful touring of the first album, they went into the studio to record the second album. Here we go, Fly By Night. Now this album here is the debut, of course, for Neil Peart on a Rush studio recording. As well, he started to take over writing the lyrics. A couple of songs on here are still leftovers from old times. The actual anthem song that appears on here with lyrics written by Neil was already in the Rush live set while John Rutsey was still in the band. The second track, Best I Can, as we said, that was also a track from those older days. But Beneath, Between, Behind, the third track on here, that was actually the first song that Neil wrote with the band. And Fly By Night, of course, the title track with I read an interview with Alex Lifeson where he listed his top 10 favorite guitar solos that he did, and the guitar solo of Fly By Night was one of his choices, which I happen to agree. I think it's a great guitar solo. We've got this Making Memories song, which was apparently something that Alex wrote on an acoustic guitar when they got lost one time out driving around in the US somewhere on a tour. Rivendell, which is exactly about Lord of the Rings Rivendell, and a very gentle acoustic piece. And in the end, again, this kind of more, just under 7 minutes long, but a little bit more of a kind of epic piece to end the album. But of course, the big exciting track on here is track 4, ending side 1, By Tour and the Snow Dog, 8 minutes 37 seconds long. Ray Daniels had 2 dogs, and their tour manager, forgotten his name now, he nicknamed them Biter and Snow Dog. And they actually were just kind of joking around one time, talking about what would happen if Biter and Snow Dog were like fictitious characters in a fantasy story and they had to battle each other. And so basically that just led to the creation of the song. And I think they said on the Wikipedia article, the song is actually in 8, it actually has 8 separate parts to it. But you know the song, it tells the whole story, this epic battle between Baitor, the dark prince of what from Hades, basically, the netherworld, and his arch nemesis, Snow Dog, where they battle together, and you hear, like, you know, Alex's guitar is Snow Dog, and Geddy's growling bass is Baitor, and they have this epic battle together. And Snow Dog is just about defeated, but finally in the end he summons the energy and beats Baitor, which I guess Baitor basically just runs off or takes off, because we know he's coming back. He does come back again, right? So yeah, that was the big thrill here on this album. The drumming, of course, is now taking the band in new directions. Again, John Rutsey's drumming was great for what it was on the first album, but there is definitely a different level of drumming going on here, because, you know, Neil obviously really wanted to develop his drumming, and always, until the end of his career, he was always looking to better himself, improve himself. All right, let's see here. The band actually toured with Kiss, touring with Kiss, because at the time Kiss was still not really big yet, so they would both tour together. Apparently, Rush and Kiss actually became really good friends, and there were stories about Gene and Paul sitting in the hotel room together, playing acoustic guitars and singing songs that would never make it onto a Kiss album. There was one story about how the guys in Rush got Ace Frehley birthday presents for his birthday, and he was so thrilled about it. He said, "These other guys, they didn't even remember my birthday. You guys remembered me. Oh, you're so sweet." So the bands actually had a really good relationship there in the early days, before, you know, both of them started getting too big to open for one another, and they went their separate ways. They also opened for Aerosmith, but at this time here, the stories about how the road crew of Aerosmith were just so snobbish and wouldn't give Rush a sound check. Even one time gave Neil heck for trying to tune his drums, and, you know, he had to go out somewhere out in a closet somewhere to tune them, actually. Yeah, as I think it was Neil who said Aerosmith were the band that showed us everything not to do. Let's see here. The title track was released as a single, and it went to number 45 in Canada and number 88 in the US. And basically, Rush's fortunes were looking pretty darn good at the time. Things would change, however, by the release of the third album. Rush were now really interested in taking their music more in a progressive direction. We open Caress of Steel here with the first 3 tracks, still kind of sticking to what the band were doing on the previous album. Bastille Day, again, a short, hard-rocking track with lots of, you know, really cool drumming in there, basically about the French Revolution. We have I Think I'm Going Bald, which was kind of a joke on a Kiss song called I Think I'm Going Blind, you know, about growing older and, you know, worried about losing your hair and so on, even though the members were all still in their early 20s at this point. And then, of course, Lakeside Park, which is, you know, Neil thinking back to one summer when he had a job I think, working somewhere along the park by a lake. Kind of nice, memories type of song there, And then we go on to the epic The Necromancer. This tells the tale of the three men of Willowdale, Toronto, who are on their way out into the lands of the Necromancer, totally based on Tolkien, but using the three men of Willowdale rather than hobbits. And again, this is a track that goes through multiple parts there, and we've got like this kind of a darker, heavier scene. I think it's Neil Peart who is doing the narration. It does sound like him, just slowed down a little bit, maybe to give his voice a slightly deeper, richer feel, but I'm pretty sure it's him. You've got like the wonderful closing of the song where actually everything seems lost, and then Baitor basically revolts against the Necromancer and sets everybody free. I mean, he was the enemy in the previous song, and he's probably still the enemy, but he's the enemy who's trying to escape from this world, and so yeah, he basically ends up saving the day. Enter a champion. Prince Baitor appears. And I really think like the ending of this song, the final part there with that really melodic riff and the melody and the music, I often feel like I can sing Tonight is a Wonderful Time to Fall in Love by April Wine over that riff, and it really works out really nicely, actually. Anyway, fantastic, really cool song. Of course, it still is a bit cheesy in a way with that narration and the lyrics, but I mean, hey, it's, mid-1970s, Tolkien is showing up everywhere. Uriah Heep had their, fantasy albums, and Led Zeppelin talked about him, so, why the heck not? And then we go on to side 2, which is just a one solid track for the whole of side 2. But the funny thing is that this is not like a Close to the Edge or even a Supper's Ready, where, the music just gradually evolves into the next part and the next part. This is basically, like 6 separate tracks, which just have no track break between them, so that it's all one track. I mean, each track begins and ends, and there actually is a slight pause in between most of them. So there's no reason to put this together into one track except to just say that it is. But nevertheless, that's what they decided to do. Which actually I don't really like, because I think, what is it here? Bacchus Plateau. I really like that one. And that actually was included on a Rush sampler compilation that they gave out to some radio stations. They just took that one part. And I think it would have been a great standalone track. But anyway, you've got In the Valley and this Didex and Narpets. Narpets being an anagram of parents. Neil playing a drum solo. Neil and Geddy both shouting antonyms, where Geddy taking the role of the youth and Neil taking the role of the parent, and then both of them shouting, listen, at the very end. This whole one here, No One at the Bridge, is really like a progressive metal song with that kind of moody atmosphere, but getting a bit heavier in places. The Fountain wrapping it all up. This album was a really brave attempt at doing a progressive hard rock, heavy rock type album, but unfortunately, because there were no singles, the record label really felt there wasn't anything to get behind it, and so the album was not promoted very well. And basically, as Rush went on tour, the attendees at each show basically became fewer and fewer, and as they called it, the Down the Tubes tour, this almost saw the end of the band. However, with all the struggles afoot and the label telling Ray Daniels, you gotta get this band to start giving us more singles, that's what we want, singles are what sells an album, singles are what makes the money, tell them. Rush turned around and said, no, we're going to do things our way, and we're not going to listen to you. And that's what brought about the next album. But you know what? Before I go on to talk about that, I actually have got to pause the video for now, and I'm going to come back and talk about the rest of this tomorrow. But hey, for you, it's going to be like, see, wasn't a long wait. So, by the way, I happen to know this video is already over half an hour long. Let's keep moving. Here it is. Rush, 2112, 1976, the big album, and probably the beginning of what I would consider the first of 5 consecutive albums you absolutely must hear, not only if you are a Rush fan, but just simply if you are a rock music fan, or a prog rock fan, or a guitar music fan, or whatever. Just 5 albums you gotta hear. This is the first of them, Rush 2112. This is the album where Rush said, basically, if we're not going to make it, then we're going to give it one last shot doing it our way, and nobody's going to tell us what to do. And it just so happened that that attitude, that kind of frustration, that rebellion against the label and the music industry and singles and all that stuff in general, that kind of energy and so on just translated perfectly well, that this just became such a huge album for the band. I mean, you don't need me to tell you this. You know it. You know it already. This is just one of those albums, like it's on the list of 1001 albums you gotta hear before you die. 2112, side 1 being like Fountain of Lamneth, but I think much better done. Whereas Fountain of Lamneth was just a series of basically 6 songs that were all parts of a story. Here, the individual tracks sometimes segue into one into the next. Other times there is a bit of a break, but the story just feels more, theatrical, more visual, more like a 20-minute epic piece rather than 6 individual tracks. Of course, you can still break it down into the, what is it anyway? There's 7 parts on here. But it doesn't matter. It just flows very beautifully as a story. Of course, being a kind of a futuristic society where the priests of the Temple of Syrinx decide what is good entertainment for the populace, and freedom of expression, especially in the arts, is basically out of the question. And this young man finds an old guitar, tunes it up, figures out how to play some beautiful things on it, and thinks, wow, this is going to change the world, and brings it to the priests to tell them, hey, you've got to hear this wonderful thing I found, and they are not interested. And then he has a dream where he meets an oracle, and there's, some conflicts going on between the elder race of man and what's the other group? Anyway, and it all comes down to the young man and his frustration, desperation, despondency ends up taking his life, and just then there's this, massive battle, and all planets of the Solar Federation, we have assumed control as it finishes. Side 2 is a regular Rush album of a collection of songs. Interestingly, there are 3 songs here to point out. One of them, Lessons, which is apparently written by Alex, pretty good solid hard rocker. Tears, the one kind of slower acoustic track, which is written by Geddy Lee, the lyrics are, and Twilight Zone, which was just one of those last-minute songs, which actually have become kind of a trademark of most Rush albums, where they think they've got it all figured out and everything's ready to go, and then in the last 2 days of the recording, they just come up with a song to throw on at the very end. And of course, we've also got Something for Nothing. This is a really... Oh, I'd have to mention Passage to Bangkok, because everybody loves that one, because it's a drug song. Yeah, I mean, they're basically talking about that things that are considered illegal in North America or in other Western countries are considered legal and quite normal in other places. And I think that's what the song is about, traveling to these different countries where people are using different things such as opium or whatever in a recreational way, and it's perfectly acceptable in those places, or at least was at the time. That's my interpretation. Anyway, I think this is one thing that's really interesting, is that this is the last of the Rush albums where Rush are basically a hard rock, heavy rock band who started out as a blues-based hard rock, heavy rock band, but gradually became more and more progressive. But even still on this album, it's the heavy stuff that still kind of takes the lead. It's like they are trying to be more progressive as a hard, heavy rock band. They released a live album after this, All the World's a Stage, and there was a note in the... I think a liner note in the album that said, this is the close of chapter 1 or something like that. And that would move on to the next chapter in Rush's album career. Let's move on to that one then. After 2112, Rush were basically given the freedom to do whatever they want. The record label knew that the band, left to their own devices, could actually produce an extremely successful album. So Here, until now, Rush had been recording in basically a studio in the suburbs or in town in Canada. Now, for the next album, they went off to Wales, and for the next two albums, they spent their time in the UK doing all their writing and rehearsing and recording. So the first of that to come out is A Farewell to Kings, 1977, and this is really where the band switched over from being the hard, heavy rock band becoming more progressive to being a progressive rock band. I mean, the really heavy, hard edge of some of their older songs is gone from here. And an interesting point also is I found, listening to these albums again, the first four albums, when Geddy sings, he sometimes has this kind of accented way of pronouncing things, and that accent is now basically gone. He's changed his vocal style somewhat, and doesn't need that kind of a street tough guy accent anyway that he had a little bit, I think. Anyway, so Farewell to Kings, this and the subsequent album, in my opinion, are just two of the great progressive rock albums of the 1970s. These two albums are up there with, the best of Yes and King Crimson's efforts, the best of Genesis and Jethro Tull and Camel and Gentle Giant and Van der Graaf Generator and Pink Floyd and all those biggies out of England in the 1970s. In fact, I saw a video a couple of years back on YouTube where, I forget who it was now, but one guy, I think he's a comedian, but he also loves music, was talking about the 10 biggest or best prog bands of the 1970s. 9 of them were English, and 1 of them was Rush. It's pretty cool. This one here, of course, you've got Farewell to Kings at the beginning with an almost kind of Renaissance acoustic guitar intro. Alex really does get to flex his acoustic guitar muscles more on here, which I think is really cool. Xanadu, what can you say? Rick Beato made a 30-minute video talking about how this is probably the greatest song Rush ever did. Just talking about the music from like every small detail, what chords they used, what notes they used, how different things were played. Just what an incredible composition this is. And not only that, but just how the production, the whole mixing of everything it's a case where the technical production engineering part is perfectly matched with the masterpiece of the music itself. Oh, let's see here. Closer to the Heart, of course, the song that got played on the radio lots and lots. Cinderella Man, which is actually a pretty cool song, but it just seems to be less of a standout track in the shadow of some of the other tracks on here. Madrigal being a slower acoustic piece, which they felt was essential for them to do for the album, but is not one that I believe they have ever done live. At least in the book here, they said that it was one that just wasn't meant to be a live track. And finally, Cygnus X1, the first 10 minutes of the, in total, 30-minute story. I really love Cygnus X1. I think it might be my favorite, or at least top 3 Rush tracks. And in Martin Popoff calls it in here kind of like the evil twin of Xanadu, because Xanadu is such a lush piece, with lots of synthesizer, atmospheric parts, birds chirping, and it does get a little heavy in some parts, a little bit more powerful anyway, but Cygnus X1 is just such a fantastic adventure. Like, listening to this and knowing what the story is about, I can totally picture the video. And apparently during the live shows, they actually had a video that played on a screen behind them for this song. You start off with the opening remarks and the launching of the rocket, and then you have this these kind of spacey sounds, a little bit like FX from the Black Sabbath Volume 4 album, these kind of echoing effects. And then in the distance, you hear a couple of bass notes. And I imagine a kind of vast space scene, and in the distance, the Rocinante, the space vessel, is gradually drawing nearer, slowly drawing nearer as the bass gets louder and louder in the mix, and the playing becomes, a few more notes are added and more notes are added, and then finally the drums and the whole band kicks in there, and we can imagine the Rocinante. Now we are seeing it up close, we are seeing the view of the ship's hull, we might even be seeing what it looks like inside with the crew at the helm, whatever. And then, of course, there's the actual lyric part where it explains about heading out towards the black hole of Cygnus X1. And then it goes into this almost kind of like a punky kind of upbeat rock bit there. And then after that you get that guitar solo, and then you end up with this kind of spacey, kind of like a tense moment, and you can almost imagine the Rocinante is now drawing closer and closer to the black hole, and then finally the music intensifies, and you can imagine now the Rocinante is actually caught within the gravitational pull of the black hole, and everything is getting really intense, and the ship is falling into the the hole, I guess, and the drumming on here is amazing. Listening to Neil Peart's playing is just so incredible because he's doing so much so intensely, and yet it just sounds so perfectly timed. And then of course you've got Geddy Lee hitting I read somewhere that it's the highest note that he's ever hit on a recorded album at the very end of this song. And later on, actually, Geddy Lee would say that one of the problems they had in the early days was that they would write the music, record it and everything, and then he'd have to sing to it, and then realize the key is actually a little bit too high. And so he would have to shriek and really like hit the high notes all the time, and they would eventually remedy that in a couple of albums. But yeah, Cygnus X1, I just love that. It's first of all, I was a big fan of black holes when I was a kid. I saw the Disney movie. The whole concept of this massive like vortex in space is just really thrilling. And the song, I think the song actually almost has a kind of slight reflection of the Disney black hole movie, because there was also the Professor Reinhardt and the Cygnus X1 spaceship, which was actually out at the edge of the black hole observing it. And he also, I think, had a plan to plunge his ship into the hole to see what might be on the other side. But anyway, yeah. Band going on tour. One of the interesting things about this book here is that after discussing the tracks on the album, Martin Popoff then talks about what the tour was like, who they toured with, and one of the things I really appreciate reading about Rush is that they pretty much have nice things to say about everybody. And if you don't read about any nice things about somebody, well, maybe they just didn't have anything nice to say, or there just wasn't enough space to put it all in. But, they went on tour with Blue Oyster Cult, and they talked about how well they got along. Alex says, how much he respects Buck Dharma. They talked about the incident with the Godzilla, where they have a recording at the beginning before the song, and this animatronic Godzilla should appear, and Rush switched the tape so that at one show it just suddenly said, "Hello, I'm Mr. Ed." They talk about Thin Lizzy, how well they got along with them. I remember in the movie they talked about touring with UFO, and just, what a wild time that was. These guys are heavy drinkers, and we don't hear too much about Rush hitting the hard stuff, but as far as drinking goes, there seemed to have been some times where they joined into the festivities there. Other bands, there was one really cool one. Let me see here. There was Rory Gallagher, they got along really well with. And then there was even one story about being on tour with Bob Seger somewhere in the States. And after Rush's show, the crowd were calling for an encore. And Bob Seger and company were just off stage, and they were saying, "Go on, give him an encore." And they were saying, like, that just never happens. When you're the opening act, you never get to go out and do an encore. So it seems to me that just these three guys were just such down-to-earth characters and just really got along well with other musicians and other people, so that they were basically treated very kindly wherever they went. Anyway, we move on to Hemispheres. For some people, probably the ultimate Rush album. Certainly, with regards to songwriting, music creation, this was one of the hardest albums to make. They start off, with the sidelong epic Cygnus X1 Book 2, the whole Hemisphere story, the story of the Greek gods, the left and right side of the human brain, and all that. And the character from Cygnus X1 going through the black hole becomes a disembodied spirit who appears amongst the ancient Greek gods, and basically brings balance to this left and right side dichotomy. So that's a pretty cool story. We actually hear little bits of the Cygnus X1 inserted in this long track here. Side 2, we've got Circumstances, yet another song, as with Fly By Night, about Neil's experience in England when he was younger. I think it's really such a cool song. It shows what Rush can do, and what It's only 3 minutes and 40 seconds, but it just feels like longer because there's just so much going on in the music. Really cool. The trees, again, it's under 5 minutes long, but again, like so much happening in there. A kind of metaphorical situation of oaks and maples and a labor dispute type thing. And then finally, the massive La Via Strangiato with, 9 minutes and 34 seconds of probably one of the coolest instrumentals ever. I mean, YYZ gets so much more credit. It's just so much more popular. But I honestly just enjoy this. This just such a journey again, taking you through different parts. The little bass solo burst, the use of the what was that? Oh gosh, what was it now? It's that music from so many of those old cartoons I used to see. Forgot the name of it now, but it's that dun 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 da 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 dun dun da 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 da. And apparently, they just inserted it in because it felt right. And later on, they thought, oh, we should probably pay this guy some royalties before we get sued. And apparently, the estate of the original composer. Should have looked this up before. I'll probably put it on the bottom of the screen here. They then wanted to sue the band for using the music without permission, but the kind of statute of limitations had expired. But the band thought, well, we should, pay something anyway. So they actually voluntarily gave money to the estate of that composer. I should have looked this up. So, I mean, it's just another example of these guys being like really genuinely honest, hardworking people who recognize the efforts of others. They don't want to step on any toes. They just want to do their thing. So yeah, 2 massive albums here then, 2 essential prog rock albums, I think, from the 1970s and just in general. And basically, these albums along with 2112 really helped kick off the whole, so many musicians like Kirk Hammett, the guys in Dream Theater, many others, they just really dug what Rush were doing and just really helped them think about how to move their playing on into new levels. The cat wants in. All right, just a moment. So let's move along then. The band actually had more or less had enough of trying to put those massive compositions together. And even, with regards to the vocals, apparently during Hemispheres, they had, Geddy had tried singing along a little bit during the kind of, acoustic playing of the songs, and everybody's like, yeah, that's cool, that's great. And then they finally went into the studio to record him singing to the music, and once again he realized the key is a little too high, and so he really had to get that kind of almost, like a shrieking vocal sound. I kind of call it the chicken warble, because he does that little like, oh, kind of, when he's like really hitting the notes, and his voice, the vibrato is really forcefully in there. Don't want to say it sounds like Yoko Ono, but the shriek I'm talking about. And he actually does not do that from here. Permanent Waves, released January 1st, 1980. Wow. And what wonderful cover art. Hugh Syme designing all of the band's album covers since Caress of Steel. Here the humor is starting to come forth. We've got the woman with the waves in her hair. We've got waves splashing here. We've got a figure waving in the background, which I read somewhere it's actually Neil Peart waving, but I read somewhere else it's Hugh Syme waving, so I don't know. Yeah, lots happening. Anyway, this is the album where they just said, let's do away with doing all these massively difficult tracks. Let's get back to, more simplified songwriting, like, let's not say simplified, but concentrated songwriting. And, they hit it off with Spirit of Radio right off the beginning, and just what a fantastic track. You watch some of these reaction videos to this song. People are like, it's like 3 or 4 songs in one song. You've got the reggae part, you've got the hard rocking part, and you've got, that wonderful melodious guitar part at the beginning. And just a very down-to-earth song about, enjoying waking up and listening to the radio and what you hear, and basically saying like when radio was a free thing, when the DJs chose the music themselves. Yeah, anyway, that's what that song is alluding to. We've got Free Will, which is also another massive track on here. One of the things I think is that Alex Lifeson is now experimenting a little bit more, particularly with his lead guitar work. I feel he's kind of like pulling and bending and squeezing out sound effects from the notes that he didn't do so much in the past. So some kind of change in style there as well. And of course, what do we have? Natural Science, which is probably it's 9 minutes 17 seconds long, so one of the last of the really longer pieces with multiple parts, apparently very difficult to play live. But just, what a fabulous album, and what a way for the band to come into the 1980s. Now, this one here, I've often heard it said that a lot of Rush albums come in pairs. Like the first two albums are kind of a pair. There's like the before and after with John and with Neil, but still basically a hard rock band. We've got Caress of Steel in 2112, the first real big step into trying to write more progressive type music, and then the very successful outcome of that. And then we've got, the whole Farewell to Kings and Hemispheres pair. This album doesn't really have a pair, they say, but it is a very important step moving on to the next album, which, of course, is 1981's Moving Pictures, the definitive Rush album, perhaps, like the starting point. You want to find out what the band is about, start here. And maybe from here, then work your way back to the next 5 albums first. Tom Sawyer, the opening track, and probably just the best known of Rush's songs. Certainly one of the most, if not the most popular track. Red Barchetta, a fantastic progressive track that runs into, just around 6 minutes there, but this wonderful story, both relating about, driving a fancy car through the countryside, but in a futuristic, scientific kind of storyline there. So, when I first heard this way back when, I thought that's what it was. It was just about driving cars, and I'm not a big, car buff type person, so, whatever. But, yeah, what a story, actually. I love that song and love the music. YYZ, the instrumental, the Rush instrumental, just the most popular one, and pretty cool at that. And Limelight on side 1, that just really beautiful, more melodic piece with, I think, probably one of the best, if not the best, Alex Lifeson guitar solo ever. Just the way he really goes into bringing out that kind of almost loneliness, that feeling in the lyrics, of being out there on the stage in front of all these people, but not really, being able to connect with them and kind of hesitating to do so. And there's that kind of, withdrawn feeling, and that guitar solo just seems to really bring out that kind of soulful loneliness almost, or whatever. The Camera Eye, the last of the, really long pieces, this one being 10 minutes long. Lots of cool riff work in here, great guitar solo near the end, and the use of the synthesizers. We see the synthesizers coming into the Rush albums more and more after 2112, where it was used kind of more as an effects type of thing. It starts actually being used as not only effects, but as an instrument. And here on this album here, and it's really starting to become like one of the rhythm instruments in the band's arsenal. So, yeah, Moving Pictures, and what a fantastic conceptual album cover where people are moving pictures of pictures that are very moving, because these people are obviously very touched by the, emotionally touched by the pictures. And as well, on the back of the album cover, it showed that it was actually a moving movie set. So making a film, moving pictures. Hugh Syme really kind of reaching his comedic peak there. Right, okay, this video's getting really long, isn't it? I hope you don't mind. I mean, the Aerosmith one was like 30 minutes or something like that, and it's getting long. But anyway, here we go. So we move on to Signals, and this is such a really important change in Rush's approach. This is where the synthesizer really comes into the forefront, as we hear right with the opening track, Subdivisions. And very beautiful. I mean, that synthesizer, I'm not a big fan of synthesizers, or I wasn't in the 1980s anyway, but hearing that, I thought that's the synthesizer being used in a way that I can really enjoy. So it does show up here on a lot of the tracks. We've got Analog Kid, which with the intro, which just has such, it's like Alex is doing rhythm and Geddy is doing lead on the bass almost for that intro part. Chemistry, Digital Man, what's the one I'm thinking of here? New World Man, which is one of those last minute tracks, really reminds me of The Police. And I think The Weapon, which is part 2 in the Fear series. The other one being Witch Hunt from Moving Pictures. The weapon, yeah, it has that whole middle section with the synthesizer and kind of those kinds of sounds, and Alex once again kind of giving experimental guitar effects. He does also get some really cool solos on some of the tracks here. Countdown being, basically a song about watching a rocket take off and a synthesizer solo. But in spite of all the really great things I personally think about this album, the one thing that caught my attention when listening to it again recently is that the guitar is a bit weak in the mix. It's almost like they decided, let's bring those synthesizers forward, and we hear the drums, we hear the bass, we hear the synthesizers, we hear the vocals. The guitar is back, and Alex is playing a lot of these, 80s slashing chords, as I call them. A lot of this, jam, this kind of thing, right? Rather than, actual riffs. But he does get a bit of kind of more like riff work on here. But and the dissatisfaction with that led to the band thinking that if they want to go in a direction where they use synthesizers more, then maybe it's time to look for a different producer. They've been working together with Terry Brown since Fly By Night. He re-engineered their debut album. He'd been the man, he'd been the kind of, father figure that they'd look to in the recording studio, but they began to think, maybe as we want to change our way, it's time for us to get some different opinions. And so Terry Brown was told, it's time that we move on. Wow, huh? Anyway, that brings us to album number 10, but the cat wants in one more time. And that brings us to the 10th album in the Rush catalog. Boy, thanks for sticking with me so far throughout this video. But here we are, Grace Under Pressure, and just quickly reading about it in the book here last night, this was yet another very difficult album to make. And the reason why, Rush wanted to get a new producer, and they actually, I forget his name though, they got somebody who agreed. They had a list of about 50 producers. They had their A list and their B list, and they settled on someone from the A list, and he agreed to do it, and they were just days away from getting into the studio when suddenly, Simple Minds gave him an offer, and he decided to take that one, and he just, sorry guys, I'm going this way, and left the band. So they were pretty peed off about that, because they were now going to go into the studio without a producer, and as much as these guys are really terrific about creating their own music, they do want that outside of the band opinion, someone to tell them, that's what a producer does. The producer is not the engineer. He's the guy who makes the decisions about, let's make this, cut this part out, or let's extend this, let's use this part here, whatever. And so they got in from their B list, Peter Henderson, who had done engineering work with the likes of Supertramp, as well as some other well-known bands of the 70s. And so they thought he's going to be great. And yeah, as an engineer, they have great things to say about him. What a fantastic work he does as an engineer. As a producer, the guy could not make a decision. And for that, Grace Under Pressure was such a difficult album to make, because there was no captain at the helm saying, this is how this should go, or do this like that, or let's put this together. Everybody was just, well, what do you think? What do you think? So anyway, that, and I think there were some other reasons too. This was really, the word pressure comes up at least 3 times when the band members are talking about this album. So definitely Grace Under Pressure is a very apt title for this. Also very beautiful artwork. This is one of my favorite album artworks, just as a painting type thing. I find it really, really beautiful. So yeah, this is basically full circle for me, because this is where I really started to notice Rush. They had videos on Friday night videos, Good Rockin' Tonight. I didn't see MTV in Canada. Later on we got Much Music, and I saw Rush videos there. But Distant Early Warning, Red Sector A, The Enemy Within, The Body Electric. All of these songs showing Rush moving more in an 80s direction. There's more of that kind of reggae style stuff that started coming in, like maybe back from Spirit of Radio, and keeps showing up on some of the tracks here. The Enemy Within is just like a really speedy reggae song. Oh man, Between the Wheels being a very kind of dark one with the synthesizer, but a very kind of dark image, dark lyrics. After Image being, about a close friend. Don't remember who it was now, but someone who passed away, and Neil's thoughts on that. The was it Red Sector A, actually, about concentration camps, which the lyrics were inspired by Getty's mother, actually, who told her story of her experience in the concentration camps during World War II, and Neil writing about that. I actually, when I bought this album, I thought, okay, I have to take a deep breath because this is really going to be the 80s sound of Rush that I probably won't like. And I found actually I quite like this album. And one thing, as I mentioned with Signals, the guitar is a little bit back in the mix. They brought it forward here, and they achieved a really nice balance between synthesizers and guitars. I feel Alex, even with the slashing chords, there's just more power, more feeling behind it than on the Signals album. And that actually is also addressed in the book here too. Alex being much more satisfied with how his guitars came out on this. Geddy being satisfied that the synthesizers were not too far forward. Overall, a really cool album, and probably the last of the ones that I really feel I can enjoy listening to, because the next two albums, Power Windows and Hold Your Fire, I kind of have to be in the mood to listen to those. Any of these first 10 here, fine. I could pick them up anytime, and there are songs I'm just glad to hear always. But that takes us up through Rush becoming just a monstrous group, a monstrous meaning monstrously successful, really, really popular. And one of the cool things to see in their case is similar to the Scorpions. They just increased their popularity album after album. We don't see any massive split between band members here. Once Neil Peart joins, it's the same three amigos going on all the way through to the very end, certainly through albums 2 to 10 on here. Maybe the departure of Terry Brown was probably the one big interruption, but aside from that, it's just, Rush moving on, doing what they want to do. And yeah, sure, some fans probably dropped off after Signals or after Grace Under Pressure, but new fans came on board, and in the end, I think Rush fans accept anything that the band has done. Of course, everybody's got their favorite albums, everybody's got their least favorite albums, but I think out of these first 10 here, we've got a pretty good, solid collection of music with quite a bit of variety on it. So, let's wrap it up there then. I'm sure the video's gone over an hour by now. Rush, the first 10 albums of Rush. Let's see here. I think now for the next couple of months, I don't have any first 10 albums of anybody coming up until I think it's June or July. So let's try to do some videos that are a little bit shorter. Anyway, thanks again everyone for watching this video all the way through. We'll wrap it up here. Have a good one. Catch you in a week or two with another video. All right, take care.